You ready? Okay. You ready as well?
Yeah.
Okay. On March 26, 2022, at 11:50 p.m., the Kelowna RCMP received an unwanted person's call involving people who were camped on the private property of a building in the 1000 block of Ellis Street here in Kelowna. Approximately 30 minutes later, after the call was received, an RCMP officer responded to the call for service and arrived at the rear of the building. He found a male related to the call and engaged in him in an initial conversation. Within a minute, dispatchers received an emergency notification from the officer's portable radio indicating he needed immediate assistance. It is alleged the male produced a knife and attacked the officer, resulting in the officer receiving a serious stab wound above his eye. The officer fought to gain control of the suspect while waiting for backup, and during this time, he discharged their firearm. The suspect was not wounded as a result, but began to harm himself with the knife. Multiple frontline officers arrived on scene to assist, and the suspect was arrested. The officer was transported to hospital by EHS with serious non-life-threatening injuries. They have since been treated and released and are recovering at home. The suspect was transported to hospital with non-life-threatening but self-inflicted injuries to his neck and was committed under the Mental Health Act. 39-year-old Richard McRae has been charged with attempt murder, aggravated assault of a police officer, attempting to disarm a police officer, possession of a weapon for a dangerous purpose, and resist arrest. He has been remanded into custody until his next court appearance on April 11th, 2022. Every day, our officers attend calls for service in this community, often dealing with persons who have complex issues with continued challenge for us to support an effective and appropriate response. I would like to thank two citizens who came to the aid of the officer during the attack, but as you know, police work carries inherent risk, and this weekend is a clear example. This officer was faced with a fight for their life, and both their training and resilience prevailed in that alley Sunday morning. Our thoughts are with them and their family. The investigation is ongoing and being led by the Kelowna RCMP General Investigations Section, Robbery and Assault Unit. I'll now take any questions.
How long was the officer after he called for assistance? How long was he still alone with the individual?
I don't know the exact time frame, but we'll say within a minute or two. The area is very close here to the detachment. Within those couple of minutes, I believe there was as many as 5 officers there to support that individual.
The citizens who responded, were they also campers? Were they on the scene when the officer arrived, or were they passersby?
They, I believe, were residents of the building that was associated to that. I don't know if they heard the commotion or were nearby or how exactly they became engaged, but we're grateful for them.
So the officer was stabbed in the head, essentially, above the...
Yes, essentially, not essentially, exactly. I can't tell you the specifics of that, except to say that I believe it to be very, very fortunate that it was not more serious. And the fact that they were discharged a few hours later is miraculous.
Do you know what the weapon was exactly?
Yes, it was a knife.
Like a bladed knife, fairly long?
It was a bladed knife. I won't go into more specific details. It was a knife enough to stab a person in the face. So
the officer fired one shot. Did they hit the person or did they miss? Or?
So the officer did fire at least one shot, and the individual was not hit by gunfire. And the injuries sustained by the individual were all self-inflicted. The police did not injure him in any way beyond physically taking him down for the arrest.
And did the citizens try to stop this person from harming themselves?
Well, that's a very difficult thing to do. You know, in this particular case, what had occurred was the officer was struggling with this person. It was literally a fight for his life, and he, while he was fighting with this person, they, with Mr. McRae, I should say, they came in and were making noise and doing some things and did approach the person, and that caused him to back off.
When the officer arrived on scene, was he aware that there was a knife present?
No.
And how much experience did the officer have?
The officer has 8 years of police service with the RCMP.
And was he asking this individual to back up his tent? Was that more or less what was happening?
The call related to the two people who had a tent or a tent-like item there. What exactly was exchanged in that very short period, I don't know the answers. Obviously, we'll get more of those details as the officer recovers from their injuries. However, it was associated to that. So what specifically was said, I don't know the answer.
But it was
I think-
private property, sorry. It was private property, it wasn't on a street or an alley.
It was in a back alley on the property associated to the building where the call came.
I believe there was a recent incident involving someone where there may be mental health question marks, and there were no charges initially. In this case, there are.
I'm not sure which investigation you're making reference to. Every investigation, this one or others, it really depends on how the information is collected and the circumstances. They can't be compared one to the other. Sometimes we're able to put information together quickly to be able to support a criminal charge. In this particular case, the information was able to be collected quite quickly. The witnesses were available. We were able to get the information. The person is in custody is obviously a consideration as to when charges are laid and so forth. And so with respect to investigations, it's really difficult to compare one to the other. So I don't know which one you mean, but it really depends.
Is the person still in custody?
Yes, they've been remanded to April 11th, and they're in the custody of the BC Corrections.
So no longer in hospital then?
I believe they're still in the hospital, yes. But they're no longer in police custody, and they had an initial court appearance yesterday. One was occurred just earlier today, and they were remanded, or consent remanded is my understanding, until the 11th.
So they would specifically then be in hospital but guarded in their room?
Wherever they're located in the hospital, I don't know exactly, but yes. Just much like any other person who was in custody, whether it be with the police or corrections, they would be guarded while they're outside of that corrections facility.
And could you speculate at all on what the mental health status of the accused person, might affect the charges that have been laid against him?
So I can't speak specifically to this event because this person has been charged and allow them to go before the courts and deal with it through that process. I can speak in a general sense that the state of mind of an individual whenever they're accused of committing an offense is always a part of the investigation and relevant potentially to a prosecution. And that would be something that the BC Prosecution Service would certainly be looking at. And our job is to collect all the information, regardless of what it may be, to provide with them the circumstances surrounding the events that occurred.
Is it getting more dangerous to do police work in Kelowna these days?
I think that we all have seen in the news, if we look at Vancouver and other places with respect to incidents that are occurring, our job is public safety. We are dealing with a greater number of individuals with complex issues, often that relate to mental health, trauma, illicit drug use, and they are generally a product of support needed through health. They become a police issue in part due to a lack of services that exist within the community, and I would suggest within the province, to support individuals to where it becomes a police issue. So that is on the rise. The officer in charge, Superintendent Trias, has been very vocal with respect to the need to help create support to where the police are not being involved in what are not police matters and are health matters. And sometimes, yes, they intersect, but we are hopeful to see more support coming with respect to the ability to deal with individuals who fall in this category and leave the police to deal with police work.
Is it typical for an RCMP officer to respond to like a general disturbance alone, or is there like protocols in terms of in like pairs? Like how does that work?
Right. I think it really depends on where in the country you're doing police work. Here in the city of Kelowna, yes, we do have officers often attend calls by themselves. There's always a risk assessment that is made. I can say to you that the information on this particular call gave no rise initially to the need for a multiple member response. That being said, it's we're grateful that this member is doing well, and I can honestly say to you that they acted in an incredibly professional way, dealing with, if you can imagine suffering such an injury and still directing police officers to the location to support them while they're suffering that injury and the trauma that was going associated to that. So the initial answer is that yes, we do, and sometimes obviously we arrive with 5 or 10 depending on the
Can you
circumstances.
explain that threshold? Like, where would it be, I guess, the bar where it would be determined that you would have more officers?
I think I could provide you with clear, distinct examples of where we would. I think a person with a gun, that would be an example. A person with a knife, it is known to us. This is why people often say, why do you act in a certain way? Like, for example, why are you so distant with the person? Why do you speak in a direct tone versus like you would a normal conversation in a coffee shop? And the reason we do that is because the person may be armed and want to harm us. And so we have to allow ourselves to be in a position to react to that. And so sometimes when we talk to people and we do it at a distance, it's not because of the pandemic. It just works out for the pandemic, of course, to be humorous in a difficult situation. It is purposeful and it relates to safety and order. And so whether you're by yourself or whether you're with 10 other officers, you're still going to respond in such a way as to mitigate risk to yourself, because as we're taught, if we're not safe, the public is not safe. So we always want to make sure we can be.
Obviously a pretty traumatic event for the officer. What kind of counseling, I guess, is made available? Do they look at going kind of back on duty right away, or how does that kind of work?
Well, certainly the officer would not come back to duty until they're physically ready. That would be the response we used to always have. But physically ready also means mentally ready. As you imagine, most police officers work in a state of hypervigilance when they're on duty because they're constantly being alive to the considerations of threats around them. We have a program here in Kelowna that is very advanced, related to critical incident stress management. And these are specifically trained individuals, whether they be police officers or civilian members, that are here solely for the purposes, excuse me, let me just take a step back. Their secondary job that they volunteer is to help members cope and deal with events like this, or the just day-to-day work of policing. Mental health and support to our members is absolutely a #1 priority here in Kelowna, and I can say it's a #1 priority for the RCMP.
Is counseling being offered to the civilians that step up to help?
So there are certain processes with us. We can't directly provide that. There is victim services programs that can be put into place for those individuals, and we obviously support those. We do have a victim services program here, and they can provide them with the information, much like we support our dispatchers who were on the other side of the radio and so forth. So we always want to see whoever is impacted, be a victim, a police officer, get the support that they need.
With the onlookers, I assume it's not encouraged to participate in an active, criminal incident. What do you have to say to that?
Well, first of all, I think that we all have an inherent desire to help others. I think the vast majority of us do anyway. There's some exceptions, of course. And when they see somebody in trouble, they want to help. And sometimes people put themselves at risk in that regard. I would never encourage somebody to use a vigilante approach and put themselves in harm's way, but I'm still grateful that they helped this officer. It could have been the difference maker, absolutely. So thank you to them.
Has the injured member had anything to say that you could relay about how he got help from those people?
Unfortunately, no. It's a bit early. When I was at the hospital on Sunday morning speaking with him, he was obviously medicated, wasn't quite in a position. I think there'll certainly be an opportunity, should they be interested or he be interested, to speak with them. These are things that will come in time. We're so early in the investigation.
Will you make it known to the public who this officer was eventually, or?
No. I think we want to reserve the privacy of that person. Should they desire to do that, I suppose that's up to them, but I think they've been through a lot right now, and we try to respect everyone's privacy, whether you're a police officer or a member of the public who's been a victim, and so I don't anticipate we would.
The suspect was apprehended under the Mental Health Act. Has there been an increase in persons being apprehended under the Mental Health Act in Kelowna, I guess, in the recent past, and what is the RCMP doing to address that?
So the person was arrested for the crimes of attempt murder and so on. When they were taken to the hospital, they were looked at by doctors, obviously because they had harmed themselves with the knife, and that was separate to us. So we do traditionally or typically do arrest a number of people, or apprehend is the correct word, under the Mental Health Act when certain criteria come into play that allow us and give us the authority to do that. We always then bring them before somebody, a doctor, to review and decide whether or not they should be committed under that act. Is that on the rise? Yes, absolutely, it's on the rise. We daily, multiple times a day, I don't have the exact numbers, but our percentages are on the rise related to mental health calls. Not every person is apprehended. We do have a partnership with Interior Health, where we do have a mental health nurse that travels with one of our officers, and that can go a long way to mitigate people being arrested under the Mental Health Act, because we are not professionals that can assess whether or not a person is a danger to themselves. We can only make an evaluation to warrant bringing them before somebody, but it is on the rise.
Is the RCMP looking to bring in, I guess, more nurses with Interior Health to help combat this issue?
We are in regular conversation with Interior Health to look at how to mitigate and address these issues. I think there's a number of things that you have to look at. First and foremost is what a health issue is and what a police issue is. There are clear circumstances that are health related. It's a person has a mental health issue, they're in crisis, but they pose no danger to anyone. That's for health. That's a health reason. We are getting called to those. We want to be able to eliminate that. Then there are those that are clear police issues. And an example of that would be somebody's committing an armed robbery. I think that would be a pretty clear indicator where you'd call the police and you wouldn't call health services. Then there's that in-between period where a person is going through something related to mental health, but there is a risk. And so our role should be in those situations to mitigate risk. So we might be there to support health, to speak to that person. And so could we use more people like that? Absolutely. Could we use more teams like that? Absolutely. Could we have more programs in place to support to where we never get to that? Do they have the mental health support from the appropriate authority, being health? Absolutely. And right now we are spending a lot of our time conducting police work that is probably health work.
Are you able to comment on the suspect that was apprehended under the Mental Health Act in relation to the UBCO homicide?
I can't speak any more to that. Obviously, that's an ongoing active investigation related to one of the most serious offenses you can have in Canada, and that being homicide, except to say that our investigators continue to collect the information and evidence in support of providing a disclosure to Crown to allow them to make an effective assessment as to whether or not there should be charges. At the same time, there's a constant discussion that relates to the support of public safety in relation to this particular individual, and I can assure you that that conversation is at the forefront and the number one issue related to that investigation.
Does the suspect still remain in hospital?
I believe they are still in hospital, yes.
Back to the event on the weekend, the individual who is charged, are you able to say whether they have any criminal history or any, are they known to police?
So known to police, it's an interesting,
it's an old phrase.
Yes, it's an old phrase. Of course, we look at a person's history in relation to how they've interacted with the police. We get a call for service. The first thing we want to know is the person and what's their history, because it helps create our ability to have a risk assessment, hence why sometimes we might have more than one officer. I won't comment on this person's specific history because they're currently charged. That could be something that would be subject of a bail review. If they were found guilty, these would be things that may or may not be a part of that. We are here purely for the investigative purposes, and that would be something that likely would come out through the investigation and through public information in court. Any other questions? Any other questions about anything else we're doing?
What about the Remembrance Day investigation? Can you update us on that? It's been more than 4 months now.
Yeah, so I can't provide an update. It's not much of one at the moment, except to say that we have provided to the Crown a disclosure package. They are currently reviewing it, and we anticipate some sort of a follow-up in the next short period, and hopefully we'll have more information for you. I can't give you an exact timeline, but we've completed our investigation.
Corporal Law was able to just talk about the incident on Sutherland Avenue last night. I'm wondering if you kind of reiterate what happened there.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought you might ask, and it's not very often I can actually read things to you, but I'll read it to you just to give you an understanding of sometimes the types of calls we go to. So basically, we received a call of a report of a body. Sometimes we get those, sometimes it's animal, whatever. However, EHS and fire attended along with the police. No body was found, but an old backpack and a blanket was located. So, as you can see, it was a non-event, and we were very grateful it was.
And something like that, there were a number of RCMP officers and ambulance EMS on the scene just in case.
Absolutely. You get a call of a person potentially either in medical distress or deceased. We're going to respond appropriately with the appropriate partners such as ambulance and fire. So we were glad that was a non-event for us.
Can you give out any details on the vandalism at North Glenmore School?
That I actually don't have any information on, sorry. But we can certainly get that for you.
Okay, and then there was an unprovoked attack in West Kelowna at like a Tim Hortons and a Wendy's, I believe Sunday. Can you speak to that one at all?
I also cannot speak to that one, but we'd be happy to get more information. Perhaps Corporal Lobb can provide some assistance there. Sorry about that. Any other questions? Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time.
Thanks.